There is a very specific type of vulnerability that the PlayStation 1 perfected, and it has nothing to do with how many bullets you have left in your inventory. Most horror games in the late 90s were arms races. Whether you were stepping into the boots of a STARS member or a heavy-duty mercenary, the industry's answer to fear was usually a shotgun and a steady aim. But then there's the outlier. There's the game that looks at your weapons, laughs, and replaces them with a cursor and a slow walking speed. We're moving into the shadows of Clock Tower, a series that understood that true terror isn't about the monster you can kill, it's about the monster you have to hide from. As a kid, the hide-and-seek style of horror was a different kind of stress. It wasn't about reflexes, it was about the agonisingly slow pace of a protagonist who seems to move with all the urgency of someone window shopping while a maniac with giant gardening shears is breathing down your neck. Hearing that metallic snip snip echoing through a silent hallway is a sound that sticks with you. It's a primal human feeling of helplessness that modern jump scares struggle to replicate. In an era where everyone was trying to be the next big action horror blockbuster, Clock Tower chose to be a claustrophobic point-and-click nightmare. It traded direct control for atmospheric dread, forcing you to interact with the world through a lens of panic. Today, we're opening the door to the Barrows mansion and diving into the psychological fractures of the struggle within to see if these giant scissors still have their edge, or if the friction of 1990s game design has finally made the horror feel like a relic of the past.
Who will make it through this game of murder alive? Clock Tower.
Welcome to the PSX Index. I'm Parasine, and this is the show where I play and document all 1,278 PS1 games released across Northern America, and this episode is Index entry 212 and 213, transitioning from the high-octane, neon-soaked tracks of Crash Team Racing to the oppressive silence of the Norwegian mansion is the ultimate test of the Index's rage. This project isn't a genre-specific deep dive. It's a documentation of the entire PlayStation ecosystem. One day we're power sliding through the Wampa Islands, and the next we're frantically clicking on a cupboard, praying that a pixelated stalker doesn't see us. This is the reality of the 1,270 game monolith. It's unpredictable, it's jarring, and it requires a very specific kind of mental fortitude to go from Disney magic to psychological torture in the span of a single week. These two entries represent a fascinating moment in the console's history. The first Clock Tower on the PlayStation 1 is actually a sequel to a Japan-only Super Famicom game, yet it feels like the definitive starting point for many Western fans of survival horror. Then we have The Struggle Within, a game that trades the gothic atmosphere for a modern urban setting and a protagonist with a literal split personality. Both games are exercises in tension, using the era's technical limitations to create a sense of unease that direct control games often missed. We're going to give both of these titles their respect today, exploring the game design, the atmosphere, and the sheer audacity of trying to make a point-and-click horror game work on a console controller. Grab your amulets and keep your finger on the panic button. We have a lot of hiding to do. is a legendary quality to the atmosphere of the first Clock Tower that feels distinct from the cinematic, jump-scare heavy horror that would eventually take over the console. It's a game that understands the power of silence. While most titles of the era were trying to fill every second with a dramatic orchestral score, Clock Tower leans into the oppressive quiet of the Barrows mansion. You spend your time navigating through static, pre-rendered backgrounds that feel like high-resolution oil paintings of a nightmare, and the only thing breaking the silence is the rhythmic clicking of your own footsteps until it isn't. The arrival of the Scissorman is one of the most effective mechanical shifts in 32-bit history. It doesn't just appear in scripted cutscenes. He is a persistent, stalking presence that can interrupt your investigation at almost any moment. There's a dry, almost cruel humour to the game design here. You might be in the middle of solving a complex puzzle when that metallic snip snip starts echoing from the hallway. Suddenly, the game stops being an adventure and becomes a desperate search for a wardrobe or a bed to crawl under. It's a masterclass in tension that focuses on the error's limitations, turning the fixed camera angles into hardened spots and a slow character movement into a source of genuine panic. Moving from the direct control of a D-pad and a point-and-click interface on a console is usually a recipe for disaster, but in Clock Tower, the friction of the UI is actually part of the horror. You aren't playing as a super soldier, you're guiding a vulnerable protagonist named Jennifer, who seems to have a very casual relationship with the concept of running for her life. There is a natural, almost frustration disconnect between the player's intent and the character's actions that perfectly captures the human feeling of a nightmare. When the Scissorman corners you, the cursor, your only link to the world, changes colour to reflect Jennifer's mental state. It shifts from a calm blue to a frantic pulsating red, signalling that it's time to mash the panic button. This is where the dry humour of the 90s really shines. Watching Jennifer frantically scramble away from a guy with giant shears while you click wildly on a nearby lamp or a heavy vase is a peak PlayStation era chaos. It's an interface that forces you to feel her helplessness. You aren't just watching a horror movie, you're struggling against the very mechanics of the game to survive, making every narrow escape feel like a genuine victory over both the monster and the hardware itself.
I wonder how many days have passed since we were locked in here.
Days? I think it's been only a night.
Are we going to die like this?
Don't worry. I'm sure Helen will rescue us.
You know, you're tough.
No, you're just weak. Helen?
Jennifer, Nolan,
Helen? Helen? Helen?
The true heart of the Clock Tower experience lies in the panic system, a mechanic that perfectly captures the error's focus on vulnerability over power. When Jennifer is cornered or stumbles into a trap, the game shifts into a frantic struggle for survival. You aren't looking for a health bar, you're looking at the colour of your cursor. A calm blue means you have your wits about you, but as it flashes red, Jennifer's animations become erratic, her breathing hitches, and your control over the situation starts to slip. There is a raw human reflection in this design that many horror games lose in the favour of smooth combat loops. To survive a struggle, you have to mash the panic button with a level of intensity that mirrors the character's own desperation. If you fail, it's a game over. If you succeed, you get a few precious seconds of a head start while the Scissorman recovers. It turns every encounter into a high stakes rhythm game where the prize is simply living long enough to find the next hardened spot. It's a stressful, sweaty palmed mechanic that forces you to share in the character's terror rather than just observing it from behind a controller. As we move into index entry 213, we encounter one of the most drastic tonal shifts in survival horror history. Clock Tower 2, The Struggle Within, known as Ghost Head in Japan, decides to take the established hide and seek formula and throw it into a blender of late 90s urban weirdness. We trade the sprawling Gothic hallways of the Barrows mansion for modern Japanese suburbs, and we trade the singular focus of Jennifer for a protagonist named Alessa Hale, who brings a literal struggle within to the table. Elisa suffers from a split personality, and this isn't just a plot point, it's a central gameplay pillar. By interacting with certain objects or removing her yellow amulet, she shifts into Maxwell, a cold, aggressive persona who can actually use weapons to fight back against the supernatural threats. It's a fascinating, if somewhat clunky attempt to evolve the series' design. While the first game was purely about the era's atmospheric dread, The Struggle Within feels like the developers were trying to bridge the gap between point-and-click tension and the rising popularity of action horror. It's bizarre, it's diversive, and it represents a moment where the series began to grapple with its own identity in a rapidly changing market.
And I'll never forgive you for it. You cursed wench!
Back off, bitch.
What the hell?
There is a distinct dry humour to be found in how The Struggle Within handles its protagonist's psychological warfare. Navigating the world as Elisa feels like the classic Clock Tower experience, vulnerable, slow and prone to panic. But the moment that yellow amulet comes off, the tone shifts completely. Entering the Maxwell persona turns the game into a bizarre, aggressive power trip where you can actually whip out a gun and start blasting the supernatural entities that were just chasing you. It is one of the most unhinged design choices of the era. One minute you are a terrified schoolgirl hiding in a kitchen, and the next, you're a cold-blooded alter ego with a firearm, effectively breaking the hide-and-seek rule that defined the franchise. For a first-timer, this feels like a fever dream. The game leans heavily into its own eccentricity, featuring everything from cursed armour to a villain who looks like he wandered off the set of a low-budget slasher movie. It's clunky, and the transition mechanics are often frustrating, but you have to respect the audacity of a sequel that decides to dismantle its own core hook just to see what happens.
I must burn the statue.
I'm going to kill you.
Just give up.
Oh,
Hey, you little shit. What good is it gonna do to burn that?
oh!
That's the way I do it.
Amulet, protect me. Stephanie, I'm sorry.
Looking back at these two entries, it's clear that Clock Tower sits in a very specific, lonely corner of the survival horror pantheon. While the industry moved towards the cinematic resource management style of Resident Evil or the psychological fog-drenched depths of Silent Hill, the Scissorman remained a relic of pure hide-and-seek terror. These games were the precursors to the modern Helpless horror hits like Amnesia or Outlast, proving that you don't need a massive arsenal to keep the player engaged. You just need a persistent threat and a sense of vulnerability. The era of the point-and-click console horror was short-lived, but it left a lasting scar on the library. Even with the friction of the cursor and the occasionally nonsensical puzzles of the struggle within, there is an atmosphere here that feels irreplaceable. They represent a time when developers were still experimenting with how to make us feel human and afraid within the technical constraints of 32-bit hardware. Whether it's the gothic silence of the Burroughs mansion or the fractured urban nightmare of Alyssa Hale, the clicking of those shears still serves as a reminder that sometimes the most effective tool a game designer has is taking away the player's ability to fight back.
Look at this! I'll get him with this.
Do you know what you're doing? Digging up the Maxwell grave?
You think the curse is real? It's pure absurdity. The curse of the Maxwells is just an old wives' tale.
It's hard, isn't it?
They did it to themselves.
Everyone's dead, and it's all my fault.
Maybe so.
It would have been better if I had died.
I'm not going to die.
It's not that you've died there once already, you know. Well, I guess I've got to get rid of those zombies. It's not gonna be easy.
Stepping out of the shadows of the Scissorman and surviving the psychological fractures of the struggle within feels like waking up from a particularly jagged dream. These two entries remind us that the PlayStation wasn't just a home for high-speed carts and colourful mascots. It was a laboratory for terror that didn't mind making you feel small, slow, and completely helpless. We've traded the rhythm of the power slide for the frantic mashing of a panic button, proving that the range of this console is as broad as it is terrifying. 213 games down, 1,065 to go. Trying to document all 1,278 games is a lot like trying to hide in a dark mansion. If you don't stay quiet and keep your eyes moving, the algorithm will find you and cut your progress short. The project isn't a horror channel or a racing channel, it's a preservation effort for the entire North American library, and that kind of variety is a nightmare for the modern search engine. To keep the index from being buried in the shadows, it needs its pick crew to be loud. Right now, only 10% of you watching are actually subscribed. That means 10% of you are essentially wandering the hallways without a yellow amulet, completely vulnerable to the algorithm's whims. If you want to make sure this 1,278 game monolith reaches the finish line, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment to help boost our pulse in the rankings. You can also follow the curated playlist on your screen to see every entry we've locked into the vault so far. Next time on the PSX Index, we are trading the point-and-click tension for a pair of silver stakes and a very bad attitude. We're moving from the victims of the night to the ultimate predator. It's time to see if the Daywalker can cut through the jank of licensed movie games, or if this title is just another toothless effort. Get ready for Index Entry 214, blade. The shears have stopped clicking and the hunt is just beginning. I'll see you in the next entry.
Everyone must die and suffer